What if I told you one of Britain's most strategically important airfields that includes a runway that helped win the Second World War, launched the jet age, and once handled Concorde? It was even set to be, if needed, an emergency landing spot for the space shuttle, and it's sitting in the Kent countryside right now. And in recent years, it's been caught up in a bitter battle around planning. We're talking about Manston Airport. So today I'm going to reveal to you a little bit of the history. That runs from 1916 to 2014. Yeah, no. Let's go out there.
So there's essentially three hangars in here.
Uh-huh.
So there's the Buccaneer, which you can walk up the cockpit into look in the cockpit if you want to.
Right.
The Meteor, German design but British built glider. The Fire School, which was here.
Oh yes, the fire school, yeah.
So the museum's a whole collection of airframes, pits, it's like ejector seats, missiles, an armoury, 1940 simulation, which you might not have gone to yet. In the film Flyboys, they were used in the film and then given to us as a gift because once they were used in the film, they're no use to anybody.
Yeah, yeah.
I can go in the Wessex if you want. You can hear the engine running in there. They just put a simulated engine noise on that. Second World War memorabilia because it's such a big airport. I'll show you upstairs just how big it is. It's still the 11th longest runway in the UK. 1.7 miles, 9,000 metres, and that's 9,000 feet, 1,750 metres.
Welcome again to Peace Unplugged, a podcast that explores health and well-being. In many cases, that involves searching history, particularly if it's local history. Right in this southeast corner, there's a stretch of Chalk Plateau, and for over a century, this has formed part of aviation history. Manston Airport was a Royal Air Force station, which later became Kent International Airport. Call it what you like, it does have a deep history. So let's go back to the year 1916. Europe was at that time 2 years into the Great War, otherwise known as World War I. And over the English Channel, a new kind of warfare was beginning. That was aerial warfare. The Royal Flying Corps, predecessor to the Royal Air Force, recognised something critical about the North Kent coastline. It was the nearest point of British soil to the continent. An aircraft back then had a very limited range. The Sopwith Camel, one of the Royal Flying Corps' frontline fighters, only had an operational range of about 300 miles, and in that wartime arena, every mile was critical. So in 1916, the War Office requisitioned agricultural land right in that North Kent corner, close to the village of Manston, and they began constructing what would eventually become RAF Manston. Its purpose was to intercept German aircraft coming over from the continent. It was also to serve as an emergency landing strip for damaged aircraft. This is documented in Dobinson Sea, Fields of Deception, Britain's Bombing Decoys of World War II, English Heritage 2000. But the establishing of an airfield in 1916 wasn't just a question of flattening a field. The chalk geology of Thanet provided an ideal drainage area, and that had a pretty good advantage over other areas which were clay-based. This chalk plateau sits about 40 metres above sea level, and it's exposed to the fierce weather from the North Sea, those strong winds that we get. So for aircraft, that made taking off and landing particularly difficult, as well as being particularly dangerous. Let's not forget that original aircraft were simply made out of wooden frames and canvas. Add to that the fact that aircraft were unreliable. Navigation systems were pretty primitive. And then there's the enemy. That was the German Gotha G bomber, which conducted raids over London as well as the southeast. The Gotha raids of 1917 are particularly significant. Research published by the Imperial War Museum knows that the Gotha G4 had an operational ceiling of approximately 6,700 metres, higher than many RFC interceptors. So that made the interception of the bomber genuinely difficult. Manston pilots were scrambling up into the air, having no idea of what the odds were of survival. And yet Manston delivered. There were numerous sorties conducted for the interception of enemy aircraft, and that helped the defence of London as well as the whole of the southeast. When the Royal Air Force was finally constituted in 1918, joining together the Royal Flying Corps and the Royal Naval Air Service, Manston established itself as a very, very important station.
You can see pictures and all the props of First World War on the wall. They are all genuine.
This room was repaired, and in December 1950...
That's a part of the Gotha bomber that went down at Vincent Farm.
And for the
It's
rest
only little
Right.
bits, but they did come off the Gotha that went.
Gotha bomber.
Yeah, that went down at Vincent Farm.
city today.
Wow.
Discipline in the house was kept not by cast iron orders, rather light-hearted suggestions sometimes.
They're just a little exhibit we made up there for the First World War.
You see the Chalk Plateau with its natural drainage and its proximity to the Channel and to the continent. These were the reasons why Manston was chosen, and that made it valuable for many, many years afterwards. If the First World War established Manston, then the Second World War enabled it to become a firm legend. By September 1939, when Britain declared war on Germany, RAF Manston was fully operational. It was the fighter station with some of the most sophisticated aircraft at the time. During the Battle of Britain, fought between July and October 1940, Manston was one of the most exposed areas. In fact, it was the most exposed RAF station in the UK. It sat directly under the path of Luftwaffe assaults on the UK. The research for this is under Bungay S, The Most Dangerous Enemy, A History of the Battle of Britain, from Aurum Press, 2001. The Luftwaffe, of course, knew exactly where Manston was, and it became one of the major targets. On the 12th of August 1940, Manston was attacked by Junkers WWII, and it was one of the most concentrated raids on an airfield during the Battle of Britain. It was struck again on the 24th of August, as well as the 1st of September 1940. Those were the most significant dates. Many of the hangars were destroyed, massive craters on the runway, and of course many personnel were killed. In a revealing passage of his post-war account, Group Captain Tom Gleave, himself a badly burned Battle of Britain pilot, described Manston during August 1940. The most bombed station in fighter command. Gleave revealed, "I had a row with a German, Macmillan, 1941. RAF operational records held at the National Archive corroborate this account. Manston suffered more direct bomb hits on its operational infrastructure than any other 11 Group station during the battle. The station situation became so severe, ground personnel took shelter in the tunnels in the chalk. It's a feature unique to Manston tunnels. They are now a heritage attraction. They were excavated in 1940, and they could shelter up to 150 people. Evidence from the RAF Air Historical Branch suggests they were in the near continuous use during the height of the raids. That's RAF Air Historical Branch file AHB/II/116/15. And yet the aircraft kept flying. Operation records show that despite the damage, Manston-based squadrons maintained flying rate. Group Captain Keith Park, commanding 11 Group, described in his post-battle dispatch, "Remarkable under the conditions prevailing, Park 11 Group Fighter Command Dispatch, October 1940. Produced in Richards D, Royal Air Force 1939-45, Volume 1, HMSO 1953. Britain, of course, won the Battle of Britain. I can remember as a kid watching they used to fly by,
Sitting on the side of the plane waving.
waving everybody. Yeah, distinctly remember that. And after it, Manston entered a new phase, and that was defined less by defence, more by expanding offensive capacity, and eventually the dawn of the jet age. In 1944, Manston's main runway was significantly extended, and that was to accommodate the increasing weight of aircraft and, of course, their speed. By the end of the war, it had one of the longest runways in the United Kingdom. It eventually extended to 2,752 metres. So with the arrival of the jet age in the 1940s to the 1950s, Manston Airport, RAF Manston, transitioned to Cold War duties. It hosted jet power aircraft, including the Gloucester Meteor. That was Britain's first operational jet fighter, and it also later hosted the Canberra bomber. As the Cold War settled into a long standoff, Manston found a bit of a unique role. It became an emergency diversion airfield, with its runway that is long and wide and well maintained, positioned on high ground with clear approaches, made it ideal for the diversion of aircraft that got into trouble and could not land elsewhere. In 1953, the UK government officially designated Manston as a foam runway emergency landing ground.
It was the most heavily bombed airfield in the war. You had Barn Wallace here. Guy Gibson was here at one time. when they was doing the bouncing bomb.
That was one of very few in the country. So aircraft with distress, perhaps with undercarriage problems or fuel crisis, could be directed to Manston and brought down on a runway coated with fire suppressant foam. I can recall seeing the very same as a child driving on the road past Manston when one of those emergencies was set up. A study by the Aviation Safety Network, ASN, and cross-reference with the Civil Aviation Authority, incident data from the 1960s to the 1990s found that secondary diversion airports with long runways reduced accident severity in a declared emergency incidents by a statistically significant margin compared with incidents where no suitable diversion was available. That's the ASN Accident Database 2019, EAA paper 2003-2004, emergency diversion airports in the UK. So Manston saved lives, but it could not survive on emergency landing alone. This caused tension through the 60s, 70s and 80s. There was a tension between the military identity and a growing commercial opportunity. The RAF presence began to gradually reduce from the 1960s due to national defence reviews. 1968 Healy Defence Review, which dramatically contracted Britain's overseas and domestic military commitment, set in motion a process of gradual RAF withdrawal from Manston that would eventually culminate in the station's closure as an active RAF base in 1999. Now, for the local economy of Thanet, which is known to be one of the most economically deprived areas in the UK, this was a genuine crisis. Research by the Kent County Council Economic Research Unit in the 1990s identified the RAF's presence at Manston as directly supporting approximately 1,400 full-time equivalent jobs in Thanet economy, with a multiplier effect estimated at 2.3, meaning that nearly 3,200 total local jobs were either directly or indirectly dependent on the base. That's from the Kent County Council Economic Impact of RAF Manston, KCC, 1994. So here's the challenge. Could commercial aviation fill that void? During the 90s, the airport was rebranded Kent International Airport, and it operated under various management structures. And frankly, it struggled. The fundamental problem was not the airport's capabilities. It was the location. Thanet has limited road and rail links and would have to compete with London's two major airports, that's Heathrow and Gatwick. So for what did exist in the commercial area, passenger numbers were unsustainable. A report by the Civil Aviation Authority, UK Airport Statistics, CAA 2013, showed Manston handling approximately 79,000 terminal passengers in 2012. That's a fraction of the throughput needed to sustain a viable commercial operations. And yet Manston was extraordinarily ambitious. It handles Concorde on many occasions, its cargo operations, particularly charter freight, providing a meaningful, if insignificant, revenue stream. And of course there was still its role as an emergency airport. And it's reckoned that significantly, Manston attracted serious academic and policy attention. Dr. Peter Morrell of Cranfield University, in his widely cited analysis of UK regional airport economics, specifically identified airports like Manston as caught in a strategic gap, too large to survive as a general aviation field, but lacking the catchment population and surface access to compare with major commercial airports. That's Morrell P. Airport Economics and Finance, Cranfield University Press, 2010. So Ben's
had quite a lot of history. It did have one of the longest runways at one time, but now it's unfortunately not the longest. It does have the widest runway, to my knowledge.
Yeah, that's my understanding. It's the widest runway.
Yeah, but I haven't heard anything to say it's not. War years, it was the most heavily bombed airfield in the war. I don't know what else to say. We've got the other V bomber there, the Victor
bomber.
Yeah.
And that's what looks like out there, the yellow helicopter. That was the
SE Rescue.
SE Rescue. I remember those, the yellow one as it was. So was this part of the building, was this where the air cadets used to meet in here?
This was the MT, motor vehicle.
Right, okay.
This was where they brought the motors in to be serviced.
Oh, I see.
This is a Canadian C-33.
Superb.
Oh, that's as far as the museum's concerned, that's the most historic aircraft we got, because it was to do with Market Garden.
Right, okay.
Yeah, it got as far as Nijmegen, I believe.
Well, this one here?
Yeah, this one here. It was
Okay.
an observer one, but it was basically involved in Market Garden, but I think it actually done the flight just before it went off. That's a Spitfire Merlin engine.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And what's that? You've got a biplane at the back there?
Yeah, now they're off a film set as well.
Right.
They're off a Flyboys film set, the biplanes.
Let's get a bit closer to that.
They're full-size replicas.
Okay, I understand. I've just been doing I've just done a recent podcast about a gentleman from Birchington named Ashton Pemble, and how he was sent out to Russia to maintain, because he was a carpenter, maintaining the biplanes.
That's that little bit of 1914, 18 war bit round the corner more so. You can see pictures and all the props of First World War on the wall. They are all genuine.
This room was repaired, and in December 1950,
That's a part
was opened.
of the Gotha bomber that went down at Vincent Farm.
Was found, and for the
It's only little
Right.
bits, but they did come off the Gotha that went.
Gotha bomber.
Yeah, that went down at Vincent Farm.
city today.
Wow.
Discipline in the house was kept not by cast iron orders, rather light-hearted suggestions such as
They're just a little exhibit we made up there for the First World War.
And there's potentially a lot of ordnance, isn't there? Is there probably on the, bearing in mind it was Manston was heavily bombed,
Yeah,
would there be a lot of unexploded ordnance there?
well there could have been, but I don't honestly know.
Right.
That's a Buccaneer aircraft, front section. Well, there's a little display of air sea rescue there.
I can remember as a kid watching, they used to fly by when we were on the beach,
Yeah, sitting on the side of the plane waving.
waving everybody. Yeah, distinctly remember that. On the 15th of May 2014, Manston, the operator Infratel that took over the airport in 2005, announced that the airport was no longer commercially viable and would cease operations. I remember clearly that closure was sudden. Staff were given minimal notice. Aircraft were redirected and the terminal building fell silent. For many in Thanet, that was somewhat of a shock. There were many other regional airports that closed. What made Manston's closure different? It turned it from a local tragedy into a national controversy. It's about what happened next. The closure triggered one of the most protracted and politically charged planning battles in British aviation history. A campaign group, RESP, they came up with a proposal to reopen Manston, to make it a dedicated cargo airport, making the most of that long runway, and also the uncongested airspace. There is, of course, its proximity to the port of Dover, and of course the Channel Tunnel. Withdrawal argued that Manston could serve as a strategic freight hub for the southeast, and that would relieve some of the pressure on Heathrow and Gatwick. Now, of course, there was a counter-argument, and this was advanced by residents, groups, and crucially, by Manston's rival airfield site prospective developer, who wanted to build housing on at least part of the site. They argued about the potential for extensive noise and pollution should the airport open again. It argued that housing, not aviation, was the higher value land use in the region, where of course there is a chronic housing shortage. This is not simply a story of community good versus corporate greed, and it's important to say that clearly. A 2018 independent study commissioned by the Department of Transport and carried out by consultants Mott MacDonald concluded that there was a credible case for Manston as a freight airport in the context of projected southeast cargo demand growth, but also noted significant uncertainty in the demand forecasts on which the business case rested. That's Mott MacDonald, Manston Airport Freight Demand Study, Department for Transport 2018. The planning process ground on a Development Consent Order, DCO application. This was submitted and examined. It was rejected, it was resubmitted and re-examined. The planning inspector's examination ran to hundreds of thousands of words. Expert witnesses disagreed on runway noise and modelling and air quality projections. Crucially, the government exercised a rarely used power of compulsory acquisition in 2020, and that brought the site into public ownership. It also signalled a commitment to the airport's future.
This is our latest acquisition, Vulcan cockpit.
Wow.
Came in about 2 weeks ago.
Excellent.
Then we got the other V bomber there, the Victor.
Victor bomber.
Yeah.
And that's what looks like out there, the yellow helicopter. That was the
SE Rescue.
SE Rescue. I remember those, the yellow one as it was. So was this part of the building, was this where the air cadets used to meet in here?
This was the MT, motor vehicle.
Right, okay.
This was where they brought the motors in to be serviced.
Oh, I see. But it also caused a significant legal challenge and, of course, the costs involved with that. Research published by the Airport Operations Association, AOA, the Economic Contribution of UK Airports 2019, demonstrated that cargo-focused airports generate, on average, 4.2 direct and indirect jobs per 1,000 tonnes of freight handled annually. Applied to Manston's projected throughput figures, this model suggested that several thousand jobs could be created over a decade if the airport reached its operational targets, numbers that matter enormously in a thanate economy where unemployment consistently runs above the national average. That's the Office of National Statistics Annual Population Survey 2022. In November 2023, the development consent order for Manston Airport was finally granted. So that's after nearly a decade of closure. There were legal battles, public inquiries, and political controversy. Manston had, in the eyes of the planning system, a clear future. The Secretary of State for Transport approved the DCO, accepting the Planning Inspectorate's recommendations for the national need for additional freight capacity, combined with Manston's physical and unique geographical assets, outweighed the objections on environmental and community grounds. Now, this decision was not the end of the story. It never is. More legal challenges followed. Funding and development is a complex task, and communities around the airport continue to hold a range of views about what comes next. What the story of Manston demonstrates is its strategic value. The same chalk plateau, the same long runway, the same proximity to Europe that the War Office identified in 1916 are the reasons why Manston is still being fought over in the 2020s. Geography, it seems, does not depreciate.
That's our little bit of 1914-18 war bit round the corner more so. You can see pictures and all the props of First World War on the wall. They are all genuine.
Discipline in the house was kept not by cast iron orders, rather light-hearted suggestions such as...
They're just a little exhibit we made up there for the First World War.
And there's potentially a lot of ordnance, isn't there? Is there probably on the, bearing in mind it was Manston was heavily bombed.
Yeah.
Would there be a lot of unexploded ordnance there?
Well, there could have been, but I don't honestly know.
Right.
That's a Buccaneer aircraft, front section. Well, there's a little display of Air Sea Rescue there.
So let's bring this all together. Manston Airport began as a Royal Flying Corps station in 1916, chosen for its chalk geology, its elevated position, and its proximity to Europe. It survived the First World War. It went on to become one of the most heavily bombed airports, particularly RAF station, during the Second World War and during the Battle of Britain. Its long runway, built and extended over decades for the military needs, gave it a capability unmatched by most of Britain's regional airports, famed for its ability to have an emergency facility, divert aircraft that are in trouble or damaged. It saved lives. It was a Cold War military station, but as a commercial airport, it sadly struggled. Its closure in 2014 was both a local tragedy and a national sin of the difficulty of sustaining regional airports compared to the major hubs like Heathrow and Gatwick. There's the campaign for its resurrection, the 2023 Development Consent Order, backed by documented economic research. You see, Manston is not just an airport. You see, Manston is not just an airfield. It's a century of British history. Thank you again for tuning in to Peace Unplugged. I hope you're finding these episodes on local history interesting. I've certainly enjoyed researching them. So until the next time, bye for now.